There's no seat for an inferior person like you. Get out.
At the company party, which I attended with my wife, Charles, the sales director from the Westwood branch, blurted that out to me. Inferior? What are you talking about? I was momentarily confused by his comment and asked him seriously.
What? Aren't you my junior? It's obvious you're beneath me.
Then he noticed Mary, my wife, standing behind me.
Oh, are you Michael's wife? Well, you're too beautiful for him. What do you say? Ditch this guy for me. I'm happily single right now.
He smirked and took a step toward Mary.
Can you call your branch president?
What? The branch president? Hey, what are you talking about?
Mary's icy reply made Charles chuckle foolishly. Little did he know, this was the beginning of his downfall, a life built on pushing others down. My name is Michael. I am 55 years old and work as the sales director at the Eastwood branch of the major RR Group. RR Group was founded 50 years ago by the current chairman, Ray Smith. Ray had a knack for understanding the times, which allowed him to expand the scale of the company. Today, it has grown into a large corporation with over 1,000 employees. After graduating from college, I was attracted to this rapidly growing company and joined it. For the past 32 years, I have been working at the forefront. Since taking over as the sales director at the Eastwood branch 2 years ago, I have continued to work hard to increase sales. In my personal life, I married Mary, a colleague, at the age of 28, and was blessed with a son at the age of 30. Currently, my son is studying business administration in graduate school in England. It was lonely when he left, but I am relieved to see that he seems to be enjoying himself there. I am fortunate to have good subordinates and everything is going smoothly, but there is one person who has been a headache for me. That person is Charles, the sales director of the competing Westwood branch. Charles took on the role last year and is 2 years older than me, at 57. He actually was a senior at the same university, 2 grades above me. During college, he liked to act superior but wasn't really helpful, enjoying bossing us juniors around. I wasn't in the same seminar, so I wasn't directly affected, but some of my classmates seem to have had some pretty unpleasant experiences. He was eager to ingratiate himself with people in power, offering to help professors. However, he would push the work onto juniors and take all the credit. It seems this was a common occurrence. Occasionally, on a whim, he would treat us to drinks and then, annoyingly, whisper hundreds of times, "I treated you, didn't I?" When we reluctantly nodded, he would say, "Show some gratitude," and then make us pay for his meals at the cafeteria. We would end up paying many times more than the cost of a single juice, and from then on, we would refuse his treats, to which he would sulkily follow us and grumble. He was always comparing himself to others and, finding someone better, would belittle them endlessly to juniors at drinking parties. If they didn't agree, he would hassle them even more, saying, "You're mocking me, too." Reluctantly saying, "I think you're greater, Charles," would improve his mood. But despite dragging people around like this, he never once paid for anything himself, as I heard from friends complaining numerous times. Thus, Charles had a particularly bad reputation among juniors, but since I hadn't interacted much with him, I didn't have much of an impression. So, when I graduated and got a job related to the RR Group, having Charles as a senior didn't bother me. I was honestly glad to have a senior from the same university, and if we were assigned to the same department, I was even looking forward to learning from him. However, as soon as Charles realized I was his junior, he seemed to think he had found a good subordinate. So, during training, He deliberately approached me with a grin.
Hey, are you Michael?
Yes, you are Charles, right? A friend of mine was in the same seminar as you. As I answered, Charles leaned forward.
Really? You're friends with him? I really took good care of him.
Charles sat back, smugly.
Since you're his friend, you should listen to me too.
Why should I?
What? Because you're inferior to me? Isn't that obvious?
I was displeased with being called inferior, but since I had just joined the company, it was not wise to argue with a senior employee, so I swallowed my words.
That's right. It's better for you to quietly listen without talking back.
Charles said triumphantly. Just then, the employee in charge of my training called my name, and Charles reluctantly walked away. I realized then that if he interacted like that, it was no wonder he was disliked by the juniors. Fortunately, once the training was over, I was assigned to a different branch from Charles, and that was the last I had to deal with him. Over 30 years passed, and I became the sales director at the Eastwood branch. A year later, I learned through a company newsletter that Charles had also been appointed as the sales director at the Westwood branch. Although I am 2 years his junior, I had taken up the director role a year earlier than him. This appointment sparked a rivalry with Charles, whom I hadn't interacted with for a while.
Well, hello there, Mr. Sales Director of the Eastwood branch. How are you?
When we met again at a meeting at the headquarters, this was Charles's first greeting. It had been a while, and Charles's hairline had receded significantly, while his belly seemed to have grown. It's been a while, Charles. Thanks to you, things are going exceptionally well, I replied neutrally. Charles seemed displeased with my demeanor and muttered disdainfully,
Oh, come on. The rising star rumored to be moving up to the headquarters executive level soon. What are you talking about?
He continued with a forced smile.
I mean, I should have contributed to the company longer than you, Michael. Yet somehow it's shameful that a junior like you overtook me. But finally, my achievements were recognized. And now I'm on equal footing. Oh, embarrassing.
His tone was more self-deprecating than modest, as he continued to cling to the conversation. Well, right. Wanting to avoid getting entangled, I gave a wry smile and stepped toward my seat in the meeting room.
Well, enjoy it while you can. The company has finally recognized my abilities. I'll rise through the ranks faster than you.
He whispered so only I could hear. Glancing at Charles's face, I saw him glaring at me intensely. Let's both do our best. I returned his gaze briefly and moved to find my seat. Unfortunately, the seats for the Eastwood and Westwood branches were next to each other, and I ended up sitting next to Charles.
How are the sales figures for Eastwood? We are quite confident this quarter. Well, it's only natural, since I've taken over as the sales director.
Charles spoke as if he had forgotten his earlier words. I focused silently on the meeting to avoid engaging him further. The meeting proceeded as usual. Finally, in the sales report for each branch, Westwood's progress was highlighted. Until now, Westwood's sales had been barely above deficit, but they had recently signed a contract with a factory that developed a new technology, and this technology had also helped them develop new business clients.
I am Charles, the newly appointed sales director at Westwood branch. I have pushed forward with product development using this new technology and have secured new business clients. I am honored to receive your praise.
Charles proudly discussed the effort he put into developing products with this new technology and the work he did to secure new business partners. Indeed, Westwood's sales had significantly increased, and the other branch directors and executives seemed genuinely interested as they listened. I, having not seen Charles in a long time, felt a deep impression as I listened to his speech.
So, going forward, I intend to leverage my success in boosting Westwood's sales to enhance the sales of the entire RR group. Don't worry about anything and leave everything to me, Charles.
With a confident expression, Charles made a grandstanding show. It seemed like he was overpromising, but surprisingly, the executives took it well.
Well, Charles, in this day and age, to promote yourself like that, you are quite the character.
One executive said and started clapping, and the others joined in, amused by his antics.
Thank you very much. I, Charles, will do my best to be of service to you all.
Like a politician, he scattered his charm and gave me a sly smile as he glanced my way. The other branch directors seemed exasperated, but since the executives were applauding, they couldn't just turn away, so they clapped along, and I reluctantly joined in. Honestly, even though sales have increased, it's a limited technology that doesn't seem very valuable when considering the whole RR group. The executives seemed to be entertained by Charles's speech rather than seriously considering spreading the technology or adopting it in other branches. But Charles was already speaking as if he were shouldering the responsibility for the RR group. And occasionally he would look at me with an annoying smirk. As the meeting ended and I got up to leave, Charles grabbed my arm. "What's up? Is there something you need?"
Something I need. Don't you have something to say to me?
Good work today."
Huh?
By that time, everyone else had left the meeting room, leaving just the two of us.
Come on. You saw my accomplishments earlier, didn't you? Don't you have anything to say about that?
Yes, it was a splendid performance. It's a good motivation for us at Eastwood Branch, so we don't fall behind Westwood. I replied cheerfully, and Charles's nostrils flared.
That's right. But you know, an achievement like this isn't easy to come by. You became a director a year before me, but I was the one who got results faster. From now on, you just watch how I boost sales and climb the ranks.
He spoke arrogantly. I was inwardly fed up, but I thought it pointless to argue with someone in such a state, so I just smiled and nodded. "Indeed, please continue to do your best. I'll take a leaf out of your book and work hard too, Charles." Pleased that I had been deferential, Charles's cheeks relaxed.
I doubt you can emulate me, but well, do your best.
He laughed loudly, and I remembered something, so I asked him, "By the way, how is John, who transferred from our branch? He is a competent salesman, but is he doing well?" Charles stared at me, his expression tightening. Had I asked something I shouldn't have? I became worried.
John was from your branch. He's doing fine. I'm training him rigorously.
He replied curtly, but then inquired with a probing look.
Are you and John but close? Do you still get messages from him?
Yes, he was promising, so I took an interest in him, but we haven't had much contact in the past year. Charles seemed relieved by my answer.
That's right. John is learning a lot under me. Probably too busy to think of you.
That's good to hear. As long as he's doing well.
Don't worry about someone else's subordinate. Just focus on your own efforts. Well, I'm busy, so I'll be off.
With that, he quickly left the meeting room. Charles's behavior after I mentioned John was somewhat troubling, but feeling relieved to be free of him, I took a deep breath and left the headquarters to return to my branch. Soon after, a large-scale social gathering was scheduled at the headquarters. It's a significant event where directors from all RR Group branches and headquarters executives gather, held annually by the chairman who loves lively events. I have attended every year since becoming a director. Partners are allowed at this social gathering, so I decided to bring my wife, Mary, along this time.
Will we make it in time? It seems like it's about to start.
We should be fine. But who would have thought we'd be held up just as we were heading out? Before leaving, I received a call about a problem from one of my subordinates, and handling it took us down to the wire.
But I'm glad it wasn't a serious issue.
Mary, in her elegant dress, smiled brightly. Fortunately, the issue was resolved quickly, and we managed to avoid missing the social gathering. I thought we wouldn't make it when I received the call.
If you couldn't make it, I was worried this new dress wouldn't get its debut.
Mary joked playfully. I could miss it, and you could still attend.
No way. Then who would escort me?
Right, my bad. I couldn't possibly leave such a beautiful wife on her own. I joked as we shared a laugh. We've been married for over 20 years and hardly ever fight. As we talked, we arrived at our destination, got out of the taxi, and entered the venue of the social gathering. After checking in, we were about to enter the lively hall when I heard someone shout.
Hey,
I heard someone's voice. Not realizing it was directed at us, we continued towards the hall.
hey, Michael, can't you hear?
It was Charles's voice. Charles, good to see you. Sorry we're late. Turning around, there stood Charles with a glass of champagne in his hand, his face already flushed.
Good to see you. What are you here for?
What do you mean? It's a social gathering today. All the directors from the group are supposed to attend. I replied, exasperated, and Charles stepped closer, towering over.
There's no place for an inferior person like you here. Go home?
He spat out the words, his breath reeking of alcohol. Inferior? What are you talking about? I was momentarily confused and asked him seriously.
What? Aren't you my junior? Obviously, you're beneath me. Besides, we don't need incompetent directors who can't increase sales here.
As Charles scoffed, Mary, standing behind me, stepped forward.
Excuse me, and who might this gentleman be?
Charles finally noticed Mary.
Could you be Michael's wife? Wow, you're too beautiful for him. What do you say? Ditch this guy for me. Luckily, I'm currently splendidly single.
He smirked and took a step towards Mary. Charles, please stop your disrespectful behavior. How could he say such things to my precious wife? I felt a surge of anger at Charles's words. I stood firmly between Charles and Mary. Charles, not liking this, shouted with a red face.
Disrespectful. The only disrespectful one here is you. It's far too early for you to defy me. Who will carry the future of the RR group? You should just quietly hand your wife over to me.
Stunned by his vulgar words, Mary's cold voice echoed.
Could you call your branch president, please?
I looked at Mary, startled. She was smiling, but her eyes were not. Her face was pale with anger.
The branch president. Hey, what are you talking about?
Charles chuckled foolishly.
I am Michael's senior. Michael has an obligation to listen to me. So, his wife must listen to me too.
Just do it. Call him now.
Mary's voice cut sharply through the air. Startled, Charles fell silent. Our exchange had taken place near the entrance, drawing the attention of those around us.
Charles, you're the sales director at the Westwood branch, right? I believe Ken is the president of your branch. Call him quickly.
Mary commanded, her arms crossed. This was not the usual kind, motherly Mary, but rather a woman with an icy, assertive tone.
Why do you even know the names of me and the branch president?
Charles muttered, puzzled, looking at me as if I had told her. Charles, it would be best if you call President Ken quickly. I advised him reluctantly. Whispers around us grew louder. Just then,
Charles, what's all this commotion? I heard there was some kind of disturbance involving you.
parting the crowd, Ken, the president of the Westwood branch, approached us. Seeing me and Mary confronting Charles, he turned pale and started trembling.
Ken, long time no see. This rude person here is your sales director, I hear.
Mary smiled at Ken. Her smile was beautiful, but it sent a chill down my spine.
Is that Mrs. Mary? What has Charles done to offend?
Ken stammered, addressing Mary.
He told my husband that his kind doesn't belong here and to go home, and demanded that I be handed over to him, to me.
Mary spoke without blinking, her gaze fixed on Charles as she spoke with a sneer.
I don't care whether he is my husband's senior or whatever. Why should my husband be deemed inferior by him? My husband has achieved great results and fulfilled his role as sales director admirably.
Mary, that's enough.
I cannot stand by while you are insulted.
That's right, insulting Mr. Michael is absolutely unacceptable.
Ken deeply apologized, his voice shaking. Ken, please, you don't have to do this. I quickly tried to stop him.
Why are you apologizing to Michael and his wife like that?
Charles mumbled, completely lost.
Charles, don't you know, Mrs. Mary is the niece of Chairman Ray Smith and one of the major shareholders of our group.
What?
Indeed, Mary is related to Ray Smith, the chairman of our group. The Smith family holds a significant portion of the company's shares, and Mary had inherited her share from her late father. Mary had joined the company as my junior, and because her father had married into the Smith family, she did not carry the Smith surname, and no one knew she was the chairman's niece. I had proposed to her under normal circumstances and was shocked to my core when I first learned of her background. Recognized by Mary's family and introduced to Chairman Ray, he had said,
I've done my background checks, and there is nothing to oppose. Mary is a dear niece of mine. Please take good care of her.
He then smiled.
But understand, the relationship between family and company matters is separate. I will not give you special treatment.
In reality, members of the Smith family, even as part of the company, never received special treatment. Everyone worked just like other employees and advanced based on merit. The current president is indeed the chairman's eldest son, but that position was earned through his own merits, recognized by everyone around. I would like to think that my own advancement to the position of director was purely due to my abilities. In fact, most of the executives did not know about Mary being a major shareholder until she started attending the shareholders' meetings and appeared at social gatherings with me as director. The first time Mary and I attended the social gathering together, the surprised faces of the executives were quite a sight. Lost in these farts, I was suddenly snapped back to reality as Charles lunged at me in rage.
Michael, you advanced faster than me by leveraging your wife's status.
What are you talking about? That's not true at all. As Charles is drunk and smaller than me, I easily brushed off his arm and said that. Pushed away by me, Charles's face turned red with frustration, and he stomped his feet.
It's not fair. I'm your senior, after all.
Fair? Please don't say such childish things at your age. As I replied, exasperated, Ken, the pale-faced branch president, restrained Charles.
Charles, just apologize now.
Ick, damn. Why do I have to apologize to my junior?
I watched in dismay as the two argued, and Mary looked on with an angry expression.
Ach, honey, if we keep paying attention to him, my uncle will scold us. Let's go inside.
Mary sighed and suggested we move on, and just as I nodded in agreement,
What's all this commotion? If you block the place like this, no one can get in.
A gray voice spoke, and Ray, the chairman of our group, appeared with his entourage.
Yikes, sir.
Ken, the branch president, jumped. The people who had been whispering from a distance quieted down, surprised by the chairman's arrival.
Ken, thank you for coming today. But what's going on here? Aren't that Mary and Michael?
Ray is 85 this year, but still vigorous and youthful. His voice is strong, and although he is calm now, in his youth, he was known to roar like his namesake when angered.
Hot, sir.
Charles's face turned pale, and it seemed his drunkenness had faded.
Aren't you Charles, the sales director from Ken's branch? What's going on here?
Everyone looked around, but no one spoke.
Ray, I'm sorry for the disturbance at such a lovely gathering. It seems Charles here had a bit too much to drink. Ken, why don't you let Charles rest a bit?
Mary, who had been angry before, seemed to think it best not to escalate the issue in front of her uncle and threw a lifeline.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, sir. It's Charles's first time at the social gathering, and he got a bit overexcited. Excuse us?
Taking Mary's cue, Ken tried to take Charles away, but Charles, for some reason, brightened up and approached the chairman.
Sir, I'm honored that you know my name. You must have heard of my good reputation as a capable employee.
It seems Charles interpreted the chairman's knowledge of his name very conveniently, but the chairman remembers the faces and names of all his managers and above. Mary does too. She had been taught that it was necessary for fostering relationships at such events.
Yes, I've heard that the Westwood branch has been doing well lately, thanks to your efforts. However, too much drinking isn't good. Take a break and sober up.
Ray spoke gently and nodded to Ken.
Yes, come on, Charles. Let's rest over there.
I'm not drunk, sir. I'm thrilled you know of my achievements.
Charles shook off Ken's hand and began to make a speech in front of the chairman, his breathing rough.
Just watch. I will lead the RR group to become even greater. Next to my achievements, Michael will pale in comparison. What if I divorced Michael and Mary and took me as a cell instead?
His eyes glinted as he stared at Mary. Mary glared back at Charles with such disgust.
What are you talking about?
The chairman asked, puzzled, as his secretary approached Ray and showed him something on the smartphone screen. Sounds from a nearby recording revealed the recent exchange between Charles and Mary. Someone had filmed it and passed it on to the secretary.
Ken, what on earth is going on here?
Ray asked, frowning deeply. Ken was sweating profusely, head bowed in shame.
Mary, explain what happened.
Ray then turned his gaze to Mary.
As you just saw, Charles insulted me and my husband. When he learned I am the chairman's niece, he started yelling that my husband's success was all thanks to me and called it unfair.
Mary's explanation made Ray frown disapprovingly.
So, you're saying I favored Michael in promotions just because he's her husband? I have never done such a thing, and I thought all our employees understood that.
No, I didn't mean that.
Charles, realizing he had angered Ray, stammered in his defense. Looking around for help, no one stepped forward to support him.
But sir, I am undoubtedly competent. The fact that the Westwood branch has improved its sales is due to my efforts.
Charles rambled on about his achievements, trying to escape the crisis when another person's voice cut him off.
Charles, please stop.
The voice was calm, but Charles jumped when he heard it. Isn't that John? What's going on? I exclaimed in surprise. There stood John. You had transferred from the Eastwood to the Westwood branch and had been under my supervision, looking troubled. John, what are you doing here? This social gathering is supposed to be for directors and above. At my question, John nodded. John, who had a calm and peaceful demeanor, looked quite tired. It seemed to give people a rough impression of him.
It's been a while, Michael. Actually, I came here today because there's something I need to discuss with the group's executives. I was wondering how I might sneak in when the commotion started and the receptionists got distracted, so I took the chance to slip in.
John looked at Ray as he spoke.
Then the chairman arrived. I thought it was a good opportunity to expose everything right here in front of the chairman.
John exclaimed with a pale face. John, what exactly do you want to expose?
Stop.
As I rushed to John to press for answers, Charles shouted. Everyone froze at his sudden outburst.
John is a bit neurotic right now. Because of that, he occasionally says things that don't make sense.
Charles tried to laugh it off and stepped toward John.
Charles, you always dismiss whatever I say to the higher-ups, and you've even threatened to file for my leave without my consent. I've had enough.
John shouted back at Charles.
You were Charles's subordinate, weren't you? Michael seems to know you too. Tell me what you want me to hear.
Charles visibly began to panic.
Chairman, you don't need to listen to this low-level employee. He's sick. He's currently in treatment.
When I asked if John was doing well the other day, you said he was fine and working hard. What's this about, Charles? Were you lying then? When I pressed him, Charles bit his lip and fell silent.
Charles, Michael, both of you be quiet now. John, go ahead and tell us what you want to say.
Ray's command was calm yet authoritative, and I closed my mouth.
Thank you, sir. Since I was transferred to the Westwood branch 2 years ago, I've been exploited by this man, Charles.
According to John, as soon as he started working under Charles, he began achieving good results due to his experience and innate sales talent. However, when he reported these successes, Charles claimed all the credit for himself. John gradually realized something was off. Charles exaggerated even the smallest favors to silence him and used various methods to treat John like his own subordinate, flattery and threats included. John, inherently honest, was almost brainwashed and kept working. During a business visit to a factory, he discovered a technology that could be applied to their products. He managed to strike a deal with a factory and successfully created a new product in cooperation with the product development department. This achievement was expected to greatly benefit the struggling Westwood branch. However, just when mass production was about to start, John was suddenly removed from the project, and Charles took over as the head of this significant project. All the documentation from the negotiations and meetings with the development department was altered to remove John's name, crediting everything to Charles. The factory contacts were told that John was on medical leave due to a sudden illness, and Charles took over. Out of fear that making noise would affect the company's reputation, Charles coerced John into compliance. The project was a huge success, and Charles was promoted to sales director because of it. Charles spread rumors throughout the company that John was neurotic and could no longer distinguish between reality and delusion. Being directly under Charles and isolated from other colleagues, John found himself completely alone. As John became inconvenient, Charles used his supposed illness as a pretext to keep him confined at home. However, time away from Charles helped John realize that his achievements had been stolen, and he began to think of ways to reclaim his honor. Fortunately for John, many people didn't think highly of Charles. Although Charles ingratiated himself with higher-ups, he was often harsh to his subordinates, and quietly, people sympathetic to John existed. With their help, John gathered evidence of Charles' tyranny. And now, He had come to expose all this at the gathering.
People who agreed to help said they would come, but I told them not to. I am prepared to be fired, but I don't want to drag others into this.
And this is the evidence, then.
Ray grunted as he received the file from John.
Excuse me a moment.
Mary said, leaning in to look. As his niece, she could do things neither Ian or the other employees could dare.
Looks like there are records of files being altered in the company's main computer system.
She said, handing me the file to see for myself. It's true. And these numbers are.
Sir, do you realize this is evidence of embezzlement?
What?
Looking at the records, it was clear that since Charles's appointment as director last year, sales expenses had skyrocketed.
Ken, did you not notice this?
I'm so sorry.
Ken was nearly fainting, deeply apologizing.
Getting business costs money, Michael. You understand that much, don't you?
In the middle of his defense, Charles tried to lunge at John but was restrained by Ray's secretary, struggling as he yelled. Sure, there are times when expenses are necessary, but looking at these records, it's hard to believe that these expenses are actually reflected in any business activities. The file included copies of receipts and photos of Charles at a venue that seemed to be a nightclub, laughing with women around him. But crucially, there appeared to be no business partners present.
Damn it. Why are there even such photos?
Probably because Charles had been slyly tormenting his subordinates. Someone had investigated his personal life in retaliation. Even if you hadn't stolen John's achievements, the mere fact that someone hated you enough to investigate you speaks volumes about your lack of popularity. When I said this, Charles glared at me.
A person without people's support has no right to lead. Moreover, using company funds to satisfy personal desires is absolutely unacceptable. Right, Ken? Uncle Ray?
Mary pressed on, and Charles trembled violently.
I'll take these as evidence. Ken, as part of your supervisory duties, could you take him away? We'll call an emergency board meeting tomorrow to further investigate and decide Charles's fate. Charles, you're confined to your home until a decision is made.
Ray then whispered something to his secretary.
I've instructed to block his access to the company's computers. Don't get any strange ideas and wait for your punishment.
With those firm words, Charles sagged, his strength leaving him as he collapsed to the floor.
Come on, Charles, let's go.
President Ken helped Charles to his feet and dragged him away.
Let's start over. Sorry for the disturbance, but let's begin the social gathering. John, you join too. You and Michael probably have a lot to catch up on.
Thank you, sir.
John, I had you transferred to the Westwood branch for your career advancement, but it turned out badly, didn't it? I placed my hand on John's shoulder, and he cried tears of relief.
Let's go over there. There's delicious food. Take your time and talk.
Mary gently rubbed John's back and smiled. Subsequent investigations confirmed the evidence provided by John and his group, exposing Charles's crimes. Charles was dismissed and ordered to return the embezzled funds. He was also sued for defamation and other charges by John and other subordinates, resulting in substantial damages. Charles, long divorced and estranged from any family, ended up homeless. Struggling to make ends meet with day labor, he often caused problems and recently, unable to find work, was rumored to be scavenging through trash. A college friend I spoke to said this was a fitting end for Charles, who had always envied and used others.
In the end, Ken was demoted, huh?
Mary asked during dinner. Yes, he volunteered to step down due to insufficient oversight. He felt responsible for not properly looking out for John and the others,
That's somewhat unfortunate.
Mary said, but I remembered Ken's relieved face when he came to say goodbye. No, he seemed hopeful that this would improve the atmosphere at the Westwood branch. He was smiling, saying a company must cherish its workers to thrive. Mary nodded deeply at my words.
You should also take a leaf out of Ken's book and value the people at Eastwood. That will contribute to the growth of our group.
Yes, ma'am. Being told so by a shareholder sure puts me in my place.
No, you.
We laughed, looking at each other. Our son might also work in a managerial position someday. At that time, I want him to be someone who values his people. I must set an example myself. I plan to continue cherishing my family and colleagues, never forgetting this sentiment.